When people in alternative research and disclosure communities refer to the deep state, they're not usually describing a single secret organization or a small group of villains. They're describing a persistent power structure, a network of financial, institutional, and informational interests that operates independently of elections and public opinion. I often refer to this power structure as being comprised of various matrices. The deep state is believed to be a systemic exploitation rather than particular people. It's composed of entrenched financial power, controlled regulatory bodies, intelligence and security institutions, corporate monopolies, and media systems that shape the narrative. There's no central command, no daily meetings, and no master game plan passed down the chain. Instead, behavior is shaped by reward and punishment that's built into the system itself. They're called shared incentives, and they explain how power can persist without any centralized coordination. No single group needs to issue orders or enforce control directly. Instead, institutions and individuals behave predictably because the system rewards certain actions and discourages others. That's how they got so many doctors to push the COVID-19 vaccine and to quickly put people on ventilators, which is a very serious decision that should be made cautiously. But physicians jumped on hospital pressure based on enhanced payment schedules. People pursue and value financial security, career advancement, legal protection, and social approval, which all depend on aligning with the established institution structures. Over time, people learn which ideas are safe to support, which topics invite scrutiny, and which innovations quietly end careers. These incentives create widespread self-regulation, where compliance emerges naturally from the desire to remain funded, employed, credible, and protected. As a result, disruptive developments such as medbeds, consciousness-based healing, or full disclosure are resisted without any obvious suppression. It's also seamless. These demonized conspiracy theory concepts threaten the existing money structures, regulatory frameworks, and hierarchies of authority by creating uncertainty and destabilization. Institutions like politics, drug manufacture, and investment are designed to minimize risk by delaying, compartmentalizing, or dismissing what can't be easily integrated into the existing design. This resistance doesn't require any malicious intent on the part of the institutions. It arises from the instinct to preserve itself, which is built into the system itself. Even if Soros and Gates went broke, the machine would continue. So at this point, the deep state functions less as a secret cabal and more as a self-reinforcing structure, which sustains itself by incentives that provide stability, dependency, and control over rapid changes and individual independence. These incentives could exist as bribes to shut up and cuts to commit crimes. When we understand this, we understand that power doesn't need to exert pressure or even make itself known. The power is preserved with policy continuity, suppressed innovation, and carefully managed public understanding. Money is viewed as the anchor of this entire structure. These shared incentives explain how power can persist without any centralized coordination and how it can go on generation after generation. No single group needs to issue orders or enforce control directly. Instead, institutions and individuals behave predictably because the system rewards certain actions and discourages others. That's how they got so many doctors to push the COVID-19 vaccine and to quickly put people on ventilators, which is a very serious decision that should be made cautiously. But physicians complied with hospital pressure based on enhanced payment schedules. Long-standing financial institutions, central banking mechanisms, and debt-based economic models exert enormous influence over governments and those in public life. This is why Trump has been a target for a decade now. He's a wild card and can't be relied upon to comply or protect the system. In fact, it's just the opposite. He has vowed to destroy the deep state, which he appears to be chipping away with every executive order and every proclamation. Trump has created divergent shared incentives. He's used the same system of incentives, but is rewarding the opposite end of the spectrum: service, benevolence, and hard work. He's not only withholding support for the rampant fraud and crime, he's withholding funding for those who refuse to comply. It's really quite ingenious that he's using the deep state tactics, which by design are meant to keep it going, and he's using them to destroy the power structure. And it's working. The concern isn't wealth or financial motives. It's control through dependency, which includes dependency on credit, on centralized healthcare systems, and on employment structures that are tied to survival rather than personal fulfillment or enrichment. Basically, we must work to survive. This is where medbeds enter the conversation. Medbeds represent a category of technology that fundamentally alters the relationship between humans and authority. They aren't considered simply advanced medical devices, but consciousness-responsive healing systems. This means that medbeds work by interacting with the nervous system, brainwave states, and the body's electromagnetic and informational fields. Healing is facilitated through brain-entrained coherence and alignment rather than externally imposed or forced upon the body. That distinction matters. If healing can occur rapidly, non-invasively, and without long-term pharmaceutical dependency, then the existing healthcare profit model collapses. Chronic illness is no longer a revenue stream. Lifelong treatments lose their justification. The individual regains control over their own body. In alternative frameworks, this is seen as an existential threat to systems built on scarcity and control. The suppression of medbeds should not be described as a single decision made behind closed doors, but as the natural outcome of institutional self-preservation. Technologies that reduce dependency are deprioritized, classified, ridiculed, or quietly absorbed and buried. Funding flows toward treatments rather than cures. Innovation that cannot be heavily monetized is sidelined. Disclosure follows the same pattern. Disclosure isn't only about non-human intelligence or advanced technology. It is about revealing the true nature of human potential. For this reason, disclosure and awakening are inseparable from consciousness. Humans are now believed to be far more than biochemical machines, reacting passively to external inputs. Consciousness is seen as interactive, creative, and biologically influential. The brain functions as a receiver and organizer of information, not merely a generator of thought. Neural stimulation, emotional states, and subconscious learning patterns directly influence physiology. Simply stated, our emotions and thoughts influence our physical body. Healing, perception, and even behavior are shaped by coherence or fragmentation within the nervous system. We've talked about these conditions in previous videos on medbeds. So this understanding really reframes what we mean by control. If consciousness actually governs biology, then controlling consciousness becomes way more important than just controlling bodies. That's why fear-based messaging, trauma reinforcement, authority conditioning, and narrative repetition are all seen as tools that fragment our internal coherence. And a fragmented individual is easier to guide, easier to sell to, and easier to govern. Medbeds challenge this whole dynamic because they require the opposite condition: coherence. They function best when the user is calm, receptive, and internally aligned. Fear, confusion, and psychological instability interfere with the process. So Medbeds actually reward sovereignty rather than submission. Disclosure of this relationship between consciousness and biology would force a reckoning. It would expose just how much human suffering was unnecessary. It would also reveal that healing was never meant to be proprietary. This is why disclosure must be gradual and pretty fragmented. Sudden revelation would destabilize not only medical systems, but also economic and psychological ones. A population conditioned to outsource their responsibility for their health might misuse the technology or become vulnerable to exploitation. Scammers, opportunists, and false authorities would rush in to fill the gap for those who refuse to live healthy. This isn't denied within the medbed community. In fact, it's openly acknowledged. False medbeds and fraudulent healers are considered both a consequence of suppression and a justification for continued delay. Confusion really benefits the existing system. It discredits the legitimate technology and reinforces the narrative that people aren't ready. From this perspective, consciousness preparation actually precedes technological access for efficacy. The deep state, as described in conspiracy research, is therefore not merely suppressing devices or information. It is maintaining a worldview in which humans are passive, fragile, and dependent. A worldview where authority resides outside the individual. A worldview where healing must be granted, not activated. The suppression of consciousness science fits neatly into this pattern. Research into the effects of belief, expectation, neural entrainment, and biofield coherence has historically been marginalized or stripped of its broader implications. Findings are compartmentalized, isolated, and reframed to avoid challenging the dominant medical and economic models. Nothing needs to be hidden completely. When knowledge is fragmented, it loses power. Within this framework, the deep state is not feared because it is omnipotent, but because it's persistent. Systems resist change by design. They don't ask whether a technology is good for humanity, they ask whether it fits the existing structure. Medbeds don't. Consciousness-based healing does not. Disclosure does not. And that's why, in conspiracy circles, these three topics are inseparable. So, medbeds represent biological sovereignty. Disclosure stands for informational sovereignty. And, well, consciousness really represents personal sovereignty. Together, these ideas describe a future in which humans are less governable through fear and scarcity. That future doesn't require malicious intent to be delayed. It only needs systems to protect themselves. Understanding this framework isn't about adopting fear or assigning blame. It's really about recognizing incentives, patterns, and outcomes. It's about becoming discerning rather than just reactive. Preparation isn't waiting for technology. Preparation is learning how the mind and body work together. It's about recognizing manipulation without becoming paranoid. And it's about cultivating coherence rather than compliance. This is the real work, guys. Not fighting the system, but outgrowing it. Not demanding healing, but becoming ready to receive it. And not fearing control, but reclaiming authority over one's own biology and consciousness. That is the future worldview, and it's why medbeds, disclosure, and consciousness have been delayed together, and why they are all emerging together now.